Hello, everybody. You are here for the talk of Christoph Luetge. I think we are going to wait a few minutes to begin and wait that people join us. So we will begin in 2 minutes or something like this. So maybe we can begin, and I will introduce you, and maybe some other people will join while I'm doing the presentation. So thank you very much, Christoph, to have accepted to give this presentation about the autonomous vehicle. So Christoph Luetge is a full professor at the Technical University of Munich. He is also the head of the very difficult to say IEAI Institute for Ethics in Artificial Intelligence in Munich as well. And for this reason, he has lots of activities around not technical AI, but about everything related to the regulation of AI, the different problems we can raise and the kind of solution we can develop to regulate and control what possible issues with AI. And he is involved as such in different domains, but he has especially worked on the autonomous vehicles, all the kind of ethical problem around this kind of new vehicle that should appear in the future, or already exist to some extent. And I think today we'll give another presentation about the issues and things we can say and we can think about with this new way of moving around the autonomous vehicle. So thank you for having accepted to give this presentation. And the floor is yours, Christoph.
Thank you very much, Thierry, and thank you for the invitation to speak here in your webinar. Let me try to share my screen. So, right. Can you see it?
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah? Okay, great. So today I will talk about autonomous driving and about its ethical guidelines, legal frameworks, and the results from a project on autonomous driving ethics that we have been running here at my institute in Munich. A few words about me. You have already said something, so I will not repeat, but I would just recollect that I have been a member of the Ethics Commission on Automated and Connected Driving of the German Federal Ministry of Transport and Digital Infrastructure some years ago, which produced the first guidelines, ethical guidelines for autonomous driving. And our institute, let me say a few words about this as well. It was officially opened in 2019. This was with our then federal digital minister, Dorothee Bär. And we are working within an overall vision here at TUM, which is called human-centered engineering. So human-centered engineering would mean including elements of social sciences and humanities within the technical disciplines, especially engineering or computer science. What we do is we are not just working on the ethical or philosophical side or even humanities side of AI ethics, but we are working directly together with the people from technology. So we have in all our research groups, we have someone, a PI from the technical side and one from the non-technical side, and they are working together. We have someone, for example, from computer science working with someone from governance, or someone from engineering working together with someone from ethics. And our goal is to generate global and fair guidelines for the ethical development and also implementation of AI in society. We are also not just a traditional hierarchical research institute, but we provide a platform for cooperation between the different stakeholders impacted by AI. We're working on research projects, we're working together on workshops and conferences, and we have a growing network of other institutions and people worldwide. We held our first major event in 21, which was a virtual one, the Responsible AI Forum at the end of 2021, where also Thierry was involved. And we will have a new installment of this series in this September in Munich from 13th to 15th September, the Responsible AI Forum 23, in which we also will talk with many stakeholders from academia, politics, industry, and civil society about the issues of AI ethics and responsible AI. So here just some of our research highlights. We have a number of research projects in areas like smart cities, or AI in healthcare, or AI in Earth observation, for example, and one particular one that will be mentioned at the end of this webinar about autonomous driving as well. So let me start with the topic itself. So the development of autonomous vehicles is rising quite fast, and the question is, do ethical considerations fall behind? We have seen in the past years already a number of cases where self-driving cars killed people. One famous one was the Uber crash in Arizona in 2018. It was the first fatal crash that involved a pedestrian. So there had been cases with drivers killed before, but this was the first one with a pedestrian. A report was issued some years later. There's a lot that can be said about it. I will get back to it. But the point is that will people trust autonomous vehicles enough, especially when they are further developed, to just sit in them and use them and let them take control? So it's a case of trust. It's a question of trust. Also, as you see, the development is now actually going quite fast, not just in the US, of course, but also in Germany, with the German automobile industry set to offer self-driving cars on different levels, certainly on the Autobahn from next year on. This is quite a recent announcement. Why do we need to talk about ethics and governance? Of course, I just hinted at some of the problems that we have seen. And actually, this picture on the left is taken from the dash cam of the vehicle that killed the driver. So just split seconds before the crash. So the question is, who is responsible if and of course these cars will have crashes, and people will get killed. As with other cars, as with human drivers. So in Germany, there are around 3,000 people that get killed on the roads each year. So that number has been declining over the years, but it's still quite a significant number. And the question is, who should be responsible? It can't be just the driver or the owner of the car, because if he or she is not in control, then he could not have done anything about it. What are safe fallback plans? If something goes wrong, do we have fallback plans? Robustness of AI is a question here to be looked at. And also, this is actually the focus of our research project, what constitutes a fair distribution of such risks, because the risks might not be evenly distributed. First, it's important to see what we are exactly talking about. What levels of autonomous vehicles are we talking about? Since there are these 6 levels that the SAE, the American Association, has defined, and they range from no automation to full automation, basically. We are currently at level 2. Almost all the cars with autonomous functions or highly automated functions are at level 2, including, for example, the Teslas. The new Mercedes that came out this January, and I don't get any benefits from them for saying so, but that was the first level 3 car actually officially allowed on the streets in Nevada and in California, as far as I know, definitely in Nevada. This is the first one where you can take, where you can let the car take control for a certain time, and then when the feature requests, as it says here, you must drive again yourself. On higher levels, like level 4 and level 5, this would not happen anymore. Then the car would be fully equipped to handle all the entire voyage, the entire trip yourself. But so at least this level 3 works then at the moment on certain parts of the roads for which it is officially allowed. So not all the roads yet. So this is where we stand. So when we are talking about autonomous driving, we really mean from level 3 on, because before that, you must constantly supervise the support features, as it says here. You must steer, brake, or accelerate as needed to maintain safety. Of course, the car can do a lot on its own, but you have to constantly supervise. So as I said, I will talk about some ethical guidelines, some current regulatory efforts in our own project. I already mentioned in the beginning that I was part of this commission in 2016 and 17, which developed the German ethics code for automated and connected driving. It said it's and connected driving, although no one really knew at that time what connected driving meant. So we developed 20 ethics guidelines. For example, one was that personal injury takes precedence over damage to property, which seems straightforward, but it has to be said explicitly that, of course, damages to property have to be accepted if we can avoid personal injuries and, of course, fatalities to people in that way. Another important guideline we developed was that the liability has to pass from the driver or the owner of the car to the manufacturers and the operators of the software for those cases where the car was going on its own. And this was probably one of the most controversial guidelines at the time, was it is allowed to have a general programming of such a car that reduces the total number of personal injuries, which means the idea is to minimize the number of personal injuries, but some of them may have to be taken may have to be accepted for the car to drive at all, basically. And this means that also some kind of trade-off must be allowed. So I will, for reasons of time, I will not go through all of these. I've given you the basic points. You will also find this online. As I said, protection of people has priority over all other considerations, and we have to arrive at a positive risk balance for ethics for autonomous driving overall. Otherwise, it makes no sense to introduce autonomous cars if they aren't safer than human drivers. Also, we have to accept property or animal damage, although we made some qualifications about animal damage, so it's not exactly the same as property damage. This is not just peculiar to autonomous driving. One element that we also introduced here was that in the case of unavoidable accident situations, so if of course the car brakes harder and faster than the human driver could, but if an accident cannot be avoided anymore, then it must not be, there must be no distinction between people on the basis of personal characteristics, like, for example, age, sex, or physical or mental constitution. That is prohibited, but still allowing for a minimization of risk overall. There is a certain kind of tension within this rule, but I think it's very important to see that this is actually a question of fairness, fairness or bias. Like, would those cars be biased? And we don't want those cars to be biased and not just hit some specific people, older people more than younger people. We don't want that. And just to finish this off, it's this one, so no distinction based on personal characteristics. This was really introduced in the car that was brought on the streets this year, actually. So this is an ethical guideline that has really been programmed into the car. I was also chairing this automotive committee in 2020, which was a subcommittee of the AI for People, the group that produced many AI ethics guidelines 5 years back. And in 2020, I was, as I said, heading this group, which was specifically concerned with the automotive sector. Also, my colleague Franziska Posler, who is also here, actually, was one of the other members, and we came up with guidelines, specifically AI ethics guidelines, specifically for the automotive sector. So we started with a high-level expert group, these 7 elements, ranging from accountability, over human agency, technical robustness, diversity, and also societal environmental well-being. And we specified what those would mean for the automotive sector. So just to give some examples, the technical robustness, and that meant specifying what standards would it have to adhere to. So technical robustness would mean to comply with regulations and standards for cybersecurity management systems, an SAE standard, or human agency and oversight, a very important topic that's now being discussed everywhere when it comes to AI ethics. What does human oversight mean? So here, for example, we said that this means an integration of a conditional override option that allows the control to be handed back to the driver. And that was an intense discussion, because a lot of people, especially from the technical side, said this is the most dangerous thing to do, to let the driver take control at any time, because the human, they say, is the most dangerous element in the car. almost all the accidents are due to human errors, at least 90%. But we still said you can still hear me? Hopefully.
Yes, yes. I was not sure when it stopped, but you can go on.
Okay,
yes.
good. So the integration of an override option, we believe, is important for gaining trust. People at this point in time would rather trust cars that allow you to take back control. Maybe in a few decades, maybe this might have changed. But at the moment, we feel people would rather not trust them if they can't do anything about the auto mode. At least that's the point that we've found to be important. And diversity that translates to prohibition of discriminating based on personal features, for example, such as skin tone. I mean, this is something that you could recognize with the tools that the car has. Could try to hit people according to their skin tone, and we certainly don't want to have that. So this is something we would also not have. I will just very briefly mention two elements here. We also based our recommendations on the ethics code by the German ministry, which include this responsible balance of risks and of estimated harm. I think this is important for all of AI ethics. Of course, we have a risk. We need to have a risk-based approach. The EU AI Act does have such a one. We will talk about that later. It means that we have to take a lot of information into account, and we need to have a very responsible calculus that calculates the overall risk and then decides. We should not forget that here, in contrast to many other AI systems, autonomous cars will have to basically decide on their own because there's no time. Which is often different in, let's say, in a lot of healthcare settings, not in all, but in many, or in urban planning, even smart cities, at least in a lot of scenarios, not at all. So here we have no time. So we need to be sure that we have the algorithm the way we want it. And okay, so much maybe for that. Of course, there need to be continuous tests about this. The standards that we currently refer to are important. There will be more. The standardization agencies are currently working on a number of other standards which will come in soon in time. So this is these are our takeaways. Again, we also believed at the end a more incremental step-by-step approach would be important, and not just try to jump ahead and introduce, let's say, level 4 cars in one step. I think that is not, it's technically problematic, but it's also problematic from an ethical point of view and from a governance point of view, and from a trustworthy point of view, basically. Will we really establish the trust that is necessary so people will actually use these systems? The third point that we made here, to develop a clear regulatory framework, this is something that since then has been addressed in a couple of ways, and I will turn to that now. With AI regulation, there have been a number of attempts now that are underway. Autonomous driving is a particular case because here, actually, by the companies, regulation is viewed as the main bottleneck to the adoption of AVs. This is not just something that citizens want, but this is something that companies say we need that kind of regulation. We need to have security in terms of what can we do, what is allowed to do, and for what will we be held accountable. A recent survey indicated that people actually expect level forecasts to emerge sometime between in the next 2 years, which actually is very optimistic, I would say. I mean, even parking in garages, it can be done technically. It's mostly a problem of governance, regulation, and also ethics. But so there's quite a lot of optimism here. Then, as I said, we have a regulation underway, the EU AI Act. This would be, if it's adopted eventually, it's the first ever legal framework on AI on this level. So there have been a number of small or lower level regulation in several federal states of the US, but nothing on this on the national level or on EU level. Certainly we need in the EU harmonized rules for the development and implementation of these systems. This AI Act follows a risk-based approach, which mostly has these 4 categories, going from minimal risk to limited risk, high risk, and unacceptable risk. So systems with unacceptable risk would be prohibited. Systems that are seen to pose a clear threat to safety, livelihoods, and rights of people. The question is which ones will be included here. So what has been said so far is for example, the a type of social credit score systems, as in China, or facial recognition in certain settings. So not facial recognition in any settings, probably. We will probably have it in some, but in others, in many others, it would be considered unacceptable. I should say this is still, it's still under discussion. I would say this is not, it's not yet been passed by the European Parliament. From the other end of the spectrum, the minimal risk systems would just require some code of conduct, which is not very much. The limited risk systems would be subject to transparency conditions. So it's not fully clear what that means. It's just the way, this is the way to go. I should say we had the rapporteur for this EU AI Act, Dragos Tudorake, with us for a talk a few months ago, and he also said he does not yet know what transparency or for the next level conformity assessment would mean. This would have to be developed, actually. So probably the most interesting category is the high-risk category, for which a conformity assessment would have to be done, would be required in critical infrastructures and transport, which, for example, would include autonomous driving, certainly, but also in law enforcement, also in at the workplace, and currently it also includes education apps, which was controversial, still is. So there will be strict obligations before these systems are put on the market. And recently there was a lot of discussion about where should large language models go, including ChatGPT, for example. As I understand, some compromise seems to have been reached just these days, because there will be actually a vote tomorrow, as far as I know, tomorrow in some committee of the European Parliament. Yeah, so we will see how this goes tomorrow. It will be followed by a coordinated plan with member states to create EU global leadership in trustworthy AI. I mean, that's the idea. I have talked to other politicians as well. This is the idea to make trustworthy and responsible AI in autonomous driving, but also elsewhere, something that is an advantage to the EU and to AI from the EU on the global market. Of course, it's a try. We'll see if this holds. So here we have again the measures, for example, on technical documentation, record keeping, human oversight, and so on. So this is something where we might still see, we have seen some last minute changes, and we might see more before actually the parliament votes on that. And even then it's not clear yet that we still have the commission. But for me here, the interesting thing, what would that mean for the autonomous vehicles? Because the AI Act is often obviously more general. The question is the AI system within AVs a safety component, which can probably be answered with a yes. At least the key supporting self-driving systems, such as systems that analyze street signs or identify objects, they would fall in this category. But maybe not others, like comfort functions, infotainment apps. They would probably not be a subject to these very strict requirements, which is, I think, an interesting thing. So it doesn't mean that all elements of autonomous vehicles will have to be subject to conformity assessments, whatever that means, actually. But some of them. And this should be clarified. It should be clarified what are the risks and who should take what risk, how can we distribute risks. I will come back to that. And what does human oversight mean, and especially when these decisions are taken in real time. But besides the EU AI Act, we also have seen in 21 already the German Act on Autonomous Driving, which is a specific law only for autonomous driving, which was actually built on the guidelines of our commission in 2017. It included these definitions on technical oversight, on the risk minimal state and accident management. What does that mean? Technical oversight here, for example, means so when the driver is not in control, basically, what does it mean to have oversight in this? So, a technical supervisor of a motor vehicle with autonomous driving functions are people that can deactivate the vehicle during operation. And it's a question what that means. So it would leave the possibility, for example, for deactivating a car from the outside. The risk minimal state, which is meant here, is also very important because in case something goes wrong or the driver does not take back control when required to do so, then the car has to go to into a safe condition. And that's a very technical process, but it also has, again, it has ethical elements or governance elements. Because what does it mean, a safe condition? Should the car stop right in the middle of the street? Should it go to the side of the road? Should it try to find a place which is safe? What if there's a cliff? Should it park next to the cliff? So a lot of interesting questions here, but it just says minimal risk condition, and it also the third element. There are others, of course. We just mentioned these three. Is that this act also requires the manufacturers to set up an accident management system for damage prevention and damage reduction. And this system, and that goes back to the ethical guidelines we had before, considers the protection of human life to have the highest priority, of course, over protection of goods or property, and I think it doesn't talk explicitly about animals. And it says again, there is no weighting on the basis of personal characteristics in the event of unavoidable accidents. And this is, again, this goes back to the ethics guidelines that I mentioned before. And this is also built into the first car that I meant that was put on the roads this year. So it's quite an important point. And there are different duties that have to be complied with. I will not go into all of these. I have mentioned the basics of it, because ensuring regular maintenance of the system, this is not something that's only particular to autonomous functions. It applies to all the functions of such a car. This is the technical speech of it. But it means that there are a number of obligations, of course, that those manufacturers have to fulfill for the technical oversight, but also from the producer side. For example, this means, just to go to this duty 3 here, it must be demonstrated that the radio link is sufficiently secure for autonomous driving. So that's, of course, a very important point. So that, it should be that ruled out as much as possible that anyone could hack that link, for example. But question is, how would that be done, and what would constitute a sufficiently secure demonstration? That will have to be specified later. These are mostly technical details, preparing systems, description, and so on, or initiate necessary measures after you detect any manipulation. What would you then do? But that's, again, this is something not just particular to autonomous driving, although the connectedness of a car is certainly a new dimension. But even then, you would have to say today's cars are also Wi-Fi equipped, and a lot of these elements are already in place or important. So, as I said, this new act on autonomous driving sets legal rules for the dilemmatic situations in case of unavoidable accidents. It also creates new responsibilities between the companies and the owners and holders of the cars. It deals with data ethical questions, and of course, now we would have to see what does it mean for specific AI legislation, such as the EU AI Act, and what other international changes would we have. Okay, so I'm coming almost to the end, but I will give some insight from our own project, the Andre project, which doesn't work. I'm hopefully back.
Yes.
So I would just give some more remarks on this project. And as all of our projects in the Institute, this was a collaboration between people from the technology, from the Institute for Automotive Engineering, and from us at the ethics group. So Franziska Postler is here. She can also answer some of the questions. And this particular project looked at trajectory planning for autonomous cars. And it tried to find out what would be considered as a fair ethics setting, as a fair mandatory ethics setting in particular. Yeah, again, for reasons of time, I will not go into all the details, but in those famous situations, you know about them, what should be done? Should we hit the 5 people to the left or the dog to the right? And of course, all the other scenarios that are there. And there, we believe that the trolley approach is not the right one. It is not a risk-based one. It takes too much focus on completely unavoidable and not really weightable situations, and that is really a problem. We have to go back to where are the risks, and this is one scenario, many scenarios that we looked at. How close should cars be allowed to get to, for example, a truck or to, as you here see, a cyclist? And those are important everyday questions. Those will matter every day for autonomous vehicles. And there we do not decide about lives, but we would decide who is to be put at more risk than the other one. Because, for example, a driver in the car is certainly much better protected than a cyclist. On the other hand, we also cannot leave drivers out of the calculation, because who would buy such a car if you know you won't be protected by the algorithm? So that's also a problem. And in this project, we looked at different ethical principles and how they might be translated into a mathematical formulation and into the programming of a car. So and then we come up with a risk cost function and implement those in cars. But just that's the general idea. I won't go into the details here, but then that changes the trajectories, of course. So we could have a more selfish, in brackets, risk distribution, or a more ethical one. So this is something, a lot of insight we gained in this project about how to manage these dilemmas. We provided practical recommendation to the AI for people and for other stakeholders. We developed software for cars, and we exchanged a lot of information and knowledge with others. Okay, we are at the end. Thank you very much, and hope we'll stay connected our social media channels or elsewhere. Thierry.
Thanks a lot for the talk, Christoph. It was very interesting, and I hope there are questions. I've seen that in the chat there is one question by Jean, if Jean is still there. Jean Ponce, with the head of PRAIRIE, scientific head of PRAIRIE.
Yeah. So
I don't know if people can talk directly, so maybe I can read the question. That was, I think it was more about the first part of the talk, to see to what extent, and maybe it's I don't think he's waiting for a general definition of what ethics is, but the question is, are most of these ethics rules, so what you said at the beginning, are just perfectly reasonable regulation rules? So what is regulation and what is ethics, and what does it mean maybe to, I'm interpreting, but maybe what does it mean to do ethics, and to what extent is it different from regulation, or is it just the same?
Okay. Well, of course, ethics is non-binding. So ethics doesn't have the full force of the law. Ethics, which doesn't mean that law is without ethics, of course. So it's not the other way around. But in many cases, in many other technologies as well, we have certain ethical considerations at first, also maybe ethical problems, and then we develop a law or laws and regulation over time. and that was the idea here, because it's not possible to regulate right at the start. So when the technology is developed, because we don't know what are actually the problems that people are worried about, and that make technology maybe unsafe or whatever. And it's so now the current step that has been taken with the EU AI Act, but also with others, is a regulatory approach that would translate ethical guidelines into law. I mean, that being said, it should also be mentioned that other parts of the world are taking a different road. We just, I think 2 weeks ago, we had an event with the AI for People, which is still ongoing, with, for example, representatives of the Japanese government. And they said they will not take the road of a binding regulation. So they will have some kind of governance, but it will be not regulation in the EU AI Act sense. So it will be not binding rules. So they said we are perfectly aware of the responsibilities and ethical responsibility. It should be trustworthy and so on, but we will not do this kind of legal framework in this sense. So it's interesting. Those are different ways, different approaches.
Okay, thank you. So people can ask questions in the chat. I don't see any now, but so here's just one.
There's one.
Yeah, so I just read what is in the chat. So it's from Serkan Odabas from Valeo. So you probably know Valeo. It's a French, or it's probably international company about manufacturing stuff for cars. And so he asked, Jerry, who owns the data? End user of the brand? To what extent will collected data by GDPR be GDPR compliant? I think what all the data produced while you are driving, I mean.
Yeah, right. So since GDPR has been around for some years already, the GDPR requirements are of course there, and so they will still be in place when the EU AI Act eventually gets adopted. It's a question whether there might be some updates to the GDPR, but in general, yes, the data will have to be GDPR compliant. That's quite clear.
But I guess the question was also about all the. So I'm once again interpreting it. I don't think people can speak directly, but I guess that all the data that are produced while you are driving, all this will go to who and how is it shared by people? Is it because in a vehicle you have probably different parts produced by different manufacturers? So who will have access to the data? And how is this regulated?
So apparently this okay. So maybe just one more remark. I think it's important to see that these data, of course, will have to be used, and they will be used. I mean, because they're very, very important to developers. And the question is, can it be used? Can they be used for other purposes than just improving the systems? I think that should be seen of. Since already now we have this is not something that's totally new. Already now, data are being collected by the cars. Even non-autonomous cars, so it will be a new level, certainly, of data collection, and I would say this probably, since there is a lot of talk about maybe updating data protection regulation in Germany as well as in other countries, maybe there will be some change, but this is a speculation at the moment.
Okay, thank you. So people are still welcome to ask questions in the chat. So I had just a question about the Andre project. About so how did you come to this? But it's as if so there are two parts in what you said. There was what people often see as the traditional trolley problem and what is often discussed. And so you want to take a different approach, or you propose this. So how did you come to this conclusion? And I guess it's a project with different manufacturers, different companies. So how do you work also with companies in this kind of project?
Yeah, so maybe I get back to my presentation again for a brief moment. I can show it better. So with regard to the trolley problem, as you know, this is the original trolley problem. There is a person operating the switch that would get the tram to kill either just one person or 5. And originally it was just a thought experiment to analyze intuitions about ethics, whether you are more a utilitarian person or a Kantian ethic person, and that's what it was for. So later on it was used, because in 1967, of course, no one really thought about autonomous cars, not even Philippa Foot. And so later on it was used for autonomous driving and for this famous Moral machine, which was built by this software. It's still there. You can take these scenarios, which was done by the people at MIT, and I have and we have a number of problems with this approach. I think it's great, and you can collect vast amounts of data in this way, but it assumes a lot of things. First, while you can change the settings in the Moral machine, it's true, but most people don't, and in the standard settings, for example, risks are equally distributed. So people in the car are protected in the same way as people outside the car, which is not realistic. A lot of these assumptions in this Moral machine, as well as in the trolley case, which is built on, are quite unrealistic. These scenarios are very, very rare, where the car cannot go to the left, not to the right. There are people on all sides of the road. You cannot brake anymore, and so on and so on. So this is, and there actually, we talked about people from a major German car company about, because they have a database of accidents going back decades. And they said, do you find examples of this type of scenario? And they couldn't. they couldn't find any. So the point is that and of course, as a philosopher, from philosopher's angle, it's quite interesting to look at these cases and these quite artificial scenarios. But when it comes to developing software, you need to have something more realistic. These unavoidable situations will not be very realistic. And that's why we said we need to talk about realistic everyday scenarios, like this one, risk distribution for trajectories. These will be very important. Yes, we have been working with, for example, Volkswagen and Audi. Audi was very interested early on in autonomous ethics of autonomous driving already years ago. We have just recently, by the way, signed a letter of intent with BMW as well. And I remember I was just to have this side remark, in 2017 at your Assise Mobilité in Paris, I was invited to speak about the ethics of autonomous driving there and about our guidelines. So this is, and I remember talking to people from Peugeot at that event as well as your transport secretary that time. It's very important to have this discussion, and not just as a philosophical discussion, but it's one to see what is relevant for programmers, for people from technology.
I see someone is maybe typing question in the chat. I have just a question that is maybe not fundamental to what you say. There is one. So I don't know if you can see the question. So it's from Mark.
I can.
Do these regulations provide a guide or definition for showing what machine learning-based models do not contain? That model do not contain biases that may violate any of those regulations. For example, the personal characteristics aspect.
So they will. The question is, what level of detail does it have? And as I said, we currently, not currently, we had a few months ago, we had the person from the European Parliament with us, and he could not provide many details of it. So they are not yet working at that level. That will have to be developed. And on the one hand, of course, you can come up with all the details at the start. But I find that also a bit problematic, because you don't know if potentially at the level of detail you arrive at problems that cannot be solved anymore. And then you will be left, or the programmers or whoever will be left with the task, with almost impossible tasks to define what does that mean to show that these biases do not occur. I agree with that. And there have been a lot of concerns in Germany as well, by especially people from the strong German Mittelstand, medium-sized companies, that are worried that this will impact their systems as well. I mean, what you're saying, yeah, the personal characteristics approach is something that probably would be checked in some way. It's a question also, who would check that? Do we have an agency that will check that? This is maybe an interesting point, by the way, because we asked Tudorake, the European Parliament person, what approach we should take for implementing the act. And there are two ways of implementing it, a decentralized one or a centralized one. And he said, oh, only a centralized one will work. He was very strongly against the decentralized one, but I'm not sure this is a good idea. Because apparently they are aware that if they decentralize the implementation, then you might have quite different situations in different EU countries. Because they might implement it differently. So yeah, there are a lot of open questions at the moment, I would say.
Maybe just a last question, because we are in the end of the time, but I just wanted to ask that the AI Act should be voted these days, at least, if I'm right, but it has been postponed several times. So are you confident it will be voted before summer, or it will be postponed, in your opinion, if you have any information?
What I know is that tomorrow there should be a vote in the committee, in the subcommittee of the European Parliament. So it's not the parliamentary vote yet. It has been postponed several times, indeed. I remember before COVID already, we had a politician from Brussels here talking about it and saying that will be passed this year. So, but there definitely have been developments or advances since then. So I would think they are now getting there. And I would expect it to be put into force definitely by next year, if there are no major obstacles, which might still be the case. So individual countries might also still worry and maybe stop the process. It's possible. So we don't know yet.
Okay, thank you. But there are also elections that may disrupt the process.
Oh yeah, right.
Okay, so I think it's the end of this hour. So it was very interesting, and I think it's quite interesting for people from computer science to have this kind of overview about the regulation and the particular application to autonomous vehicle. And your institute work on lots of other things in health and those domains as well. So I invite people to look at what you do and at I never know this how to say this word, but the Ethical Institute in Munich. And we meet hopefully soon. And there is another talk, I think, next week by Benoît Sagou, if I'm right. So thank you very much, Christoph, and see you soon. And maybe you have some feedback after the talks if people have questions. Thank you very much again, and have a good day.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.